Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
That's it.
Something's missing. For thine is
The kingdom,
power and the glory forever. How come that was added in? Well, that's called a doxology. It's an add-on. And it was an add-on that was traditional to Jewish prayers, and it was kind of adopted, a praise, if you will. And the King James Version had that. But the King James Version was written much later than the original manuscripts. The earliest manuscripts don't have it. So that's one little thing. When you say, well, why did it stop? Because that wasn't in the earliest manuscripts. That's kind of a add-on, and it's an add-on as a doxology. Lead us not into temptation. And you say, well, how do I understand that? Well, to give it perfect context, to give it better context, go to James 1, verse 13. Now, in order to interpret weird, hard to understand sayings, you try to find the thing that most declares it, and then you use that to interpret it. And that's part of it, but I'm also going to suggest the understanding of this thing is really very straightforward. But James 1 tells you this: when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. Each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their evil desire and enticed. Okay, so first of all, lead us not into temptation is something that God wouldn't do. The second thing is, and this is where people, because it seems like they're trying to do a workaround. It's like, oh, this is hard to explain, and we really don't want to admit that it's hard to explain. So the Greek word that's used there can also mean trial or test. And he says, so don't lead us into tests. Well, that's problematic, as we'll see in a second, because James also says, consider it pure joy when you have to face a trial. So what's the deal? Is there a conflict? And I would say no. And we're going to look at this quickly today, but then next week we're going to take a lot more detail on it. The temptation to Jesus, because that gives us some explanation. That comes out of Matthew chapter 4. And it says this: Jesus was led by the Spirit. Well, okay, wait a minute. First of all, it didn't say that Jesus was led into temptation. Listen to the rest of it. Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil.
Wow.
Okay, so we've got a process going on here. Was led to be tempted, but the temptation came from the devil, not from God. After 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The first thing it says is, man shall not live by bread alone. After it was said, you want something to eat, but by every word. Then the devil took him to the holy city and said, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you. And on his hands, and Jesus said, you shall not put your Lord your God to the test. And then the third one is, you can have all of these kingdoms if you want them. And it says, be gone, Satan, for you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. So I looked this up and I went through it. The Catholic interpretation of it is that they said it might mean that word that's used for temptation might mean lead us not into the yielding to temptation. Okay, you're getting a little bit closer, but why? What is the problem? It's a clear problem. If you start reading and through all those things, you're trying to say somehow or another, God's led you into a place where he doesn't want you. And that's the issue, because God does not tempt. Now, here's a quick workaround. the original Greek that this was written in doesn't have punctuation marks. It doesn't have periods. It doesn't have commas. It doesn't. It just is a simple, continuous, and you have to figure out where the breaks are. And this which is what we. So every comma that you see in your every piece of period, these have all been added. So you can read this two ways. Lead us not into temptation. First reading. Second reading. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Now that has a decidedly different outcome to it. Yes? Yeah. You will be with me today in paradise. I say to you. I say to you today, you will be with me in paradise. I say to you today, you will be with me in paradise. Where we put the comma is important. Where we put the pause. Jesus was not like the dude in Ferris Bueller reading off the roll. Bueller, lead us not into temptation. I mean, this was obviously dynamic speaking, right? So that's one thing. So lead us not into temptation. In other words, bring us to where we should be. We can follow you and it's trustworthy. But another thing is just simply analyze the deal. Lead us not into temptation. If you're not led into temptation, the answer to that would be lead us away from temptation. If you're not led into, you're led away from. You could just as easily say, lead us away from temptation and get the exact same answer. For the life of me, I don't understand all the gymnastics that have gone into trying to explain this text and why it's, quote, so difficult. What we're asking is basically, when it says lead us not into temptation, steer us away from the stuff that can lead us away from you. All right, so that's temptation. But in this process, the word can also mean testing or trial, the word that's used for temptation. The same word is used in James 1. Instead of temptation, it says this: consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Same word that they use, lead us not into temptation. Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. Well, that passage has a ton of wisdom in it. Consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds. We're going to come back to that. I haven't really felt joyful in the middle of a trial. We will wrap that in a bow in a little while. Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. The number one predictor of success, if you are trying to successfully complete a task, talent or perseverance? Perseverance. Perseverance predicts success better than talent. Why? The only reason you persevere is because you believe you're going to ultimately be able to do it sooner or later. Talent, you can have all the talent in the world, but if you believe you're not going to accomplish what it is you're about to accomplish, you bug out. You shut it down. Perseverance, the testing of your faith produces perseverance. The testing of your faith produces a certain maturity. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete. You cannot be an All-American in football at linebacker with no tackles. you got to get in the game. And get in the game means contact, and contact means you're going to get beat up, and contact means you got to get knocked down, and contact means you've got to get up. Christianity is a contact sport. It's not treated like that oftentimes. Oftentimes it's treated more like a Coke machine. Quarter in, made my prayer. It ought to be showing up any day now because God's really all about blessing me. But it's just everywhere, and all throughout the Bible, and particularly in the New Testament, well, the Old Testament too, there's this conflict between the ability to get in the game and to get up when you get knocked down. If any of you lacks wisdom, wisdom is two things: knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know. The worst kind of person is the person who believes they know something that they don't. Those are dangerous. And that's a lack of wisdom. Ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault. In other words, and boy, this is parenting 101. When someone lacks wisdom and you're trying to supply that wisdom, probably it doesn't necessarily need to be connected to finding fault. But we can't help ourselves sometimes. And we have to explain why someone is deficient. Now, obviously, there are certain things that go on, particularly with children, where the coaching of the child needs to be such that this is inappropriate. This isn't going to get you anywhere. In Sinbad's comedy routine, he just cuts to the chase. Let that kid put the fork in the socket. He'll learn. Only take one time. But if you have to bring that up time and time and time again, you remember that time you put the fork in the socket? Remember that? Then you're probably creating an impediment to wisdom. Where a wall begins to be built between you and whomever. It could be the spouse, it could be a friend, it could be anybody. Gives generously to all without finding fault. It's not necessarily trying to say what you've done wrong. It's about what you're going to do right. It's a difference in focus. You can't beat the past. It's undefeated. You can go back and fight that sucker 10,000 times. You'll lose 10,000 times. But you can change the future. Or you can determine the future. And the two, it's important to turn loose of the past, in order to be able to influence the future. It doesn't mean you didn't learn from it. It means that you did learn from it. You're wiser. You now know something you didn't know that you either can't do or you should do or whatever. And then you can apply it moving forward. But it's when we continually have to point out, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, that it can become dysfunctional. The person who doubts is like a wave of the sea. If you get wisdom, if you get something that's really wise and you go, well, I don't know about all that, then you're not going anywhere. You're double-minded. You're unstable. So that's one of the things that we need to understand is that testing really comes about a lot of times not because of being led into the wilderness by the Spirit, but just sort of screwing up. We talked about this last week. The most important or the most fundamental thing that the fruit of the Spirit provides is self-control. If you begin to see that you are exhibiting self-control, you are beginning to see evidence that God is really at work in your life. Galatians, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. If you have self-control, you are going to be gentle at the appropriate time. If you have self-control, you're going to be kind at the appropriate time, and so forth and so on. The list goes both ways. At the end of all these, you begin to see self-control, but then also you begin to see self-control as helping to build all of these things. It's really just kind of going in a circle. And one of the things it says the fruit of the Spirit is joy. And you say, well, gee, I don't feel a lot of joy. I don't feel a lot of joy in this testing that I am being subject to. Job probably couldn't describe himself as joyful with boils and afflictions and half of his wealth wiped out and home destroyed, that sort of thing. What do we mean by joy? Well, it says this in Hebrews. It says that, and by the way, before we get to that, let's talk about this for just a second. Before we talk about Hebrews, let's talk about Matthew, the Garden of Gethsemane. He said, I'm going to pray. He took Peter, two sons of Zebedee, along with him, and he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. This doesn't sound like joy. Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, not as I will, but you will. This is wisdom, recognizing that there is a source of truth that is being tapped into regardless of the immediate circumstances. And he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Couldn't you men keep watch for just 1 hour? Watch and pray that so that you will not fall into temptation. Temptation? What temptation would they have possibly fallen into? And the temptation is, in the context of this, is pretty simple. They were tempted to quit, to run. They were tempted to be less than disciples. They were tempted to be self-interest above truth. And he says, you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. The flesh is what really, the spirit is, well, there's a lot of stuff that we say we're going to do, and then our bodies kind of get involved in it. Nah, you're not really going to do that. And that's the perseverance producing maturity. And after he told him, don't fall into temptation, then he went back again. He said, if it's not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. There is resolve to persevere. Simon, Peter himself, he knew a little bit about temptation. Simon, Luke tells us, Satan has asked to sift you all as wheat. How do you sift? How did they sift in the olden days? And it wasn't just this, it was violent.
Yes.
Throw this stuff up into the air. And then you get rid of the heavier stuff and you begin to sift it out. So Satan has asked to literally grab you by the neck, if you will, and just shake you. But I pray for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail, and when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. But he replied, look, I'm ready to go with you to prison and to death. And Jesus answered, I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows today, you will deny 3 times that you know me. So this tells you, first of all, a couple of things. Last week we talked about Jesus was born. We said, how much did he really know about what he was? It says he grew in wisdom. That was a process. I mean, the first words that he spoke, he wasn't in complete command of all the Jewish Old Testament. But as he grew and matured, he began to completely understand what this business of being man meant. But when he died on the cross, that's when he completely understood, or he completely experienced what it meant to be God. What it means to sacrifice as God for man. Man couldn't understand that. Man couldn't do that. God could. I'm ready to go with you to prison and to death. And he says, nah, you will deny me 3 times. So this says that at this point, Christ was quite aware of the details, all of the details that were going to take place in the events of the crucifixion. And he was in the garden sweating blood. So there was no joy at that time. But Hebrews chapter 12 tells us this. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. In other words, quit being tempted and having the temptation engulf you and just tie you up. Throw it off. Let us run with perseverance. There's that term again, perseverance, because perseverance is built through trial, through the facing of trials. The race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. The joy wasn't at the cross. The joy was post-crucifixion. You gotta get through the nasty stuff in order to be able to celebrate. There's the joy. To be able to look back at the event, whatever it was, and say, that was done correctly. That was done the way it should be done. Scorning his shame and sitting down at the right hand of the throne of God. The cross didn't produce joy. The cross was a opportunity for victory that brought joy. But there was no joy in the Garden of Gethsemane. So what does that mean? That means when you're in your darkest hour, don't sit there and tell yourself, I'm supposed to be joyful. That's fairy tale. Be real. I am in the middle of a crisis. I am praying to you, God. I need to persevere. There's a difference between a temptation and a test. Temptation is brought by Satan. Test is brought by God. The testing of your faith produces perseverance. The tempting of your faith is brought by Satan. Satan doesn't give a tinker's darn about you. You are pimped out by Satan. He wants what you can. If you can give him something, fine. The moment you quit giving it to him, it's like the person that has no scruples that goes on the date with the guy that has a Ferrari because she wants or he wants to be noticed for that until they meet the guy or the gal that has a yacht. And all of a sudden, well, see you, I got a better deal. And that's kind of the way Satan is. He uses you, he abuses you. He's the father of lies. He's the deceiver of the world, Revelation says. In John chapters 12, several chapters beginning around, Jesus refers to him several times as the prince of this world. He's the anti-body of everything that Christ is. If Christ is pure, then this is the opposite of pure. If Christ is faithful, it's the opposite. Christ is unfaithful. Or Satan is unfaithful. It's black and white. It's opposites of each other. One does it strictly for narcissism. What do I get out of it? Satan is the ultimate narcissist. I want this, I want this, I want this. Whereas God is the ultimate altruist. He says, I don't want anything. I loved you before any of that. You're not going to get any more love. You're not going to create more love for me by me. Just believe in me. Let me do the rest. Now you got to be careful with that, because do the rest. Some people just kind of go, well, sin, I sinned. God will eventually take care of that. And that's not. There's this tension between what we have responsibility to do as people and what we have the right to lean on God to help us with. But Scripture says when you're tempted, God always gives you a way out. You're never stuck in a box. But when you're tested, there may be no way to go around. You may have to go through. Temptation can be avoided. The test, maybe not. If the test could have been avoided, then Jesus would have been what? If there's any way to do this, hey, I'd really prefer that. But no, the test in this case required the ultimate sacrifice. You can avoid the temptation. Sometimes the test, you just gotta walk the walk. And that's important, right? So we've all got this muscle called faith, and it has to be strengthened, and it's strengthened through testing, through trial. That creates perseverance, that creates maturity, that creates wisdom. That's what all of that's scripture. But it's also just pure D common sense. If I gotta go on a mission to Venezuela, then when I'm rappelling out of this helicopter, and I look at the guy next to me, and he's got all the gear on and all this stuff, and he says, "Are you ready for this?" "Yeah, slept at the Holiday Inn last night." Whoa, not sure that I want to put a whole lot of my well-being into his hands, because there's a gap there, right? When you talk to a Christian and the Christian says, I'm standing here with you, that needs to mean something, but it also needs to have some degree of familiarity where you can look at that person and say that's you can take that to the bank. And the last thing the Christian needs to do is at that point say, "Oh, by the way, you got yourself into this trouble because of X, 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 and X." They're probably aware of that. And if they're not aware of that, I'm pretty sure that your sermonizing at that point in time won't make a lot of difference. One thing that it says is to flee from temptation. In Genesis, Joseph had been captured, and then when he got captured, Genesis says that he's a pretty good-looking dude. And the wife of the man that he was working for had noticed that. And she was like, "I got something for you." "No, I don't think so." And she tried several times to say, "I got something for you." And he said, "No, that's not where I'm going." One time, she basically, when everybody kind of left, she said, "Well, I'll just make my intentions known." And Joseph did what? He took a hike. He took a hike so fast that he left his cloak behind. There was the temptation, and the temptation was resisted. But the temptation also created a test. Because then what happened? She took the robe and did what? "Look, I got proof. This guy came in here and tried to rape me. Here's his robe." What happens to Joseph? He goes into prison. Now wait a minute. That's not a Hallmark movie. But then, it says because of his reliance upon God, that he gained great favor with the jailer. And the jailer just pretty much gave him free rein. Now, that's not to say that every time you trust God, you're going to get a good jailer. That's a little naive. It is to say that you need to be prepared for the worst when you fully engage with God. May you be asked to be a martyr at some point in your life. It's entirely possible. Ask some missionaries. On the other hand, If you succumb to the temptation, then you're sort of, instead of Joseph, you're David. And now you're trying to explain, well, I need to get the dude to come back because she's pregnant. And I got to figure out a way around this. So it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And ultimately, you got to come clean, or you're just consumed by your own stupidity, lack of self-control. Lead us not into temptation. Steer us away from evil. In fact, deliver us from evil. It's a powerful prayer that I don't think needs a whole lot of explanation other than, well, the man said it, that's what he meant. But it does take a little bit of discernment between wisdom and between temptation and testing, trial, perseverance, the source of it, because too many things that happen in our lives, we blame, whether we don't want to admit it, we blame it on God. We sort of say, I don't understand why he's doing this. Why me? And oftentimes we cannot separate temptation from testing. Consider it pure joy when you face trials. Not when you face the trial, but when you get to the other side of the trial. You got to walk through the valley of the shadow of death to get to the point where you fear no evil. So today, we take communion once again. And it's a celebration of a trial, a literal trial, a kangaroo court trial, but it was the ultimate trial. It was the testing of Jesus as a man to ask if he was ready to fulfill his mission as God. That is a trial. And the temptation would be to ask, just take this cup from me. If there's another way to do it. And that prayer was met with what? Silence. There is no other way. Sometimes your prayer, as a return of silence, you've got your answer. Is there some way, Lord, if there's some way, remove this cup from me, whatever the personal circumstances are, and the answer comes back, crickets, guess what? It's probably one that you need to persevere through. And you may need some wise counsel on that. You may need to bring someone into your life that could walk with you. That's what Jesus tried to do. You guys need to walk with me. You won't even stay awake. And pray that you're not going to be tempted, because I got a pretty good idea. I know how I'm going to have to face this. It's not with you there. In fact, you're so bad, you're going to deny me 3 times. That's real. That's a real trial. So when you read the Lord's Prayer, football teams, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, kingdom come, will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses. But what in the world are you doing except just mumbling? Because you do not get the scope, the width, the breadth of what is actually taking place. You're talking to God, Almighty, Holy, in a place where you're not. Lead me not into the temptation. Deliver me from the evil that I'm going to face. Let me persevere when these times come. That's a whole different read of what's become, sometimes I think, a little bit stale verbiage. And we just simply Bueller. And we memorize it without any passion that's associated with it. So, as we go into the communion, the ultimate sacrifice, and he was preparing his disciples for it. And he said, guys, this is my body. And it's going to be broken for you. And it's like the imagery is so profound. So profound. He's basically saying, as man, I am going to give the ultimate sacrifice. But the ultimate sacrifice I'm making as man will be so that as God, I can redeem mankind. Whew. No simple matter there. So, the disciples didn't understand any of that because they ran when their test came. There may be times in your life when you run, but he will also say that without fault, he will forgive. Such an amazing deal. So take and eat in remembrance. That the man who was God was also the God who was man. And in the most, as strange as that was, perhaps the ultimate irony is when he held up the cup of wine, traditionally the cup of redemption in the meal, the Passover meal. He said, "This is my blood shed for you." So he understood clearly what he was about to do. He was about to be whipped, tortured, spit on, beaten, nails through the hands and feet, hang on a cross from 9 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. He knew, not only did he know that Peter was going to deny him 3 times, he knew how thirsty he was going to be. He knew how much it was going to hurt. He knew that his joints were going to be dislocated from moving up and down on the cross. He knew that some guy was going to stab him with a spear to confirm his death. All of that stuff, unless you want to argue, well, he knew these details, but he didn't know the rest. Oh, no. I think he knew absolutely at that point with absolute clarity. His focus as God was really coming into play, and his role as man was beginning to leave. Because what arose on Easter wasn't man, it was God. Man, he back there. What rose was imperishable. So he was telling his people, this is my blood shed for you. What a unbelievable statement. So drink. Because the blood was shed for you too. So next week, we'll look at the whole notion of why the created believes it can tempt the creator. That's arrogance. It's also foolhardy. And then the notion of how those temptations sometimes come to us. And just a quick ahead. Satan tempted Job with calamity. He just pounded him. Sometimes you get pounded by temptation. Sometimes you get seduced by it. Sometimes it's the David. So Satan he's not a one-string banjo. He's got more than one strategy. And he attacks at your weakest point. So where you get attacked at, that's where you need to learn to persevere through. And that's where we'll start next week. God bless everyone.